It was a typical Friday evening when everything changed. I was exhausted after a long week at the office, my hair still damp from a quick shower. My roommate's cousin Jake had just moved to town and was staying with us temporarily while looking for his own place. I hadn't paid much attention when Sarah introduced us 3 days ago. He was just another face, just her cousin from back home who needed somewhere to crash while getting settled in the city. I thought I was alone as I headed to the kitchen for a late-night snack, wearing only an oversized t-shirt that barely reached my thighs. The apartment was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the street lamps outside filtering through the blinds. I didn't notice him sitting in the darkness of the living room until I had already walked past. The faint blue glow from his phone caught my eye, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Oh, you scared me," I gasped, suddenly aware of how little I was wearing, crossing my arms over my chest and tugging at the hem of my shirt. Jake looked up from his phone, his eyes widening slightly before politely looking away. But not before I caught the momentary flicker of appreciation in his gaze that sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. "Sorry," he said with a small smile, his voice deeper than I remembered from our brief interactions earlier. "Couldn't sleep. New place and all." There was something about the way the soft glow from his phone illuminated his face that made my heart beat faster. The shadows accentuated his jawline, the curve of his lips, as he smiled apologetically. I'd barely noticed him when Sarah introduced us. He was just her quiet cousin who needed a place to crash. But now, in the stillness of night, with no one else around, I saw him differently. Maybe it was the vulnerability of the moment, or the intimacy of the darkness, but something shifted between us in those few seconds. "It's fine," I said, trying to sound casual. "I was just getting some water. Do you want anything?" "I'm good," he replied, but his eyes followed me as I moved to the kitchen. Over the next few days, we found ourselves alone more often. Sarah was working double shifts at the hospital. Her first year as a resident meant brutal hours, leaving Jake and me circling each other in the small apartment. At first, our interactions were polite but distant. A nod in the hallway, a quick good morning over coffee. But gradually, things began to change. Our conversations grew longer, our glances more lingering. I found myself looking forward to those moments when it was just the two of us. One evening, we were both in the kitchen cooking dinner. I was chopping vegetables while he stirred something on the stove. The kitchen wasn't designed for two people, and we kept brushing against each other in the confined space. Each accidental touch sent a jolt through me that I tried desperately to ignore. "Can you pass me the oregano?" he asked, pointing to the spice rack behind me. I turned to grab it, but as I handed it to him, he reached past me for another spice jar. His arm brushed against mine, and I felt a surge of electricity that stopped my breath. For a moment, neither of us moved. His face was inches from mine, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. "I shouldn't be feeling this," I whispered, more to myself than to him. my voice barely audible over the simmering pots. "Neither should I," he replied softly, his breath warm against my cheek. "Sarah would kill us both." The mention of my roommate, his cousin, was like a splash of cold water. The apartment suddenly felt too small, the air charged with unspoken desires. I stepped back, creating distance between us, nearly knocking over the cutting board in my haste. "This can't happen," I said firmly, though everything in me wanted the opposite. "It would be too complicated." "You're right," Jake agreed, running his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to find endearing in our short time together. "I'll be finding my own place soon anyway." The rest of the evening passed in awkward silence, both of us careful to maintain our distance. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying our moment in the kitchen over and over. The way his eyes had darkened, the slight parting of his lips, the electricity in that brief touch. It was maddening. The tension between us only grew stronger in the days that followed. We both tried to act normal when Sarah was around, laughing at her jokes, maintaining the fod of casual acquaintances. But when she wasn't looking, our eyes would meet, and the air would crackle with unspoken attraction. We created an elaborate dance of avoidance and pretense, but there was an undeniable pull whenever we were near each other. Sarah remained oblivious, too exhausted from her hospital shifts to notice the charged atmosphere in the apartment. "You two getting along okay?" she asked one morning as she gulped down coffee before rushing out. "Great," I said, a bit too quickly. "Jake's easy to live with," Sarah continued, grabbing her bag. "Always was the quiet one in the family. Not like his brother, total nightmare." I nodded, avoiding Jake's eyes across the room. I didn't need more information about him, more reasons to find him interesting. It was already hard enough. One rainy Sunday, Sarah called to say she was staying at a friend's place closer to the hospital due to the weather. "The roads are terrible, and I have an early shift tomorrow," she explained. "Tell Jake I said hi." Just like that, Jake and I found ourselves alone again, the rain pounding against the windows like a warning. We tried to keep to our separate spaces, but eventually ended up watching a movie on opposite ends of the couch. With each scene, the distance between us seemed to shrink, as if an invisible force was pulling us together. The movie was some forgettable action film, but I couldn't focus on the plot. All I could think about was him, the gentle rise and fall of his chest as he breathed, the way his fingers drummed absently on his knee, the faint scent of his cologne that somehow filled the entire room. "We should talk about this," he finally said, pausing the movie mid-explosion. The sudden silence was deafening. "About what?" I asked, though we both knew exactly what he meant. "This thing between us," he said, gesturing to the space between us that had somehow shrunk to almost nothing. "It's not going away." I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "Jake, you're Sarah's cousin. She's my best friend. We live together. It would complicate everything." "I know," he said, his voice low and intense. Believe me, I've thought about it. I've tried to ignore it. But what if it's worth it? What if we're missing out on something real just because the timing isn't perfect? His words hung in the air between us, tempting and dangerous. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine us together, happy, figuring it out. The possibility was intoxicating. Before I could answer, my phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through the tension like a knife. It was Sarah. Reality crashed back, reminding me of all the reasons why this attraction needed to stay buried. "Hey, Sarah," I answered, my voice unnaturally high. Jake moved away, running his hands over his face in frustration. "How's the weather there?" she asked, oblivious to what she had interrupted. "Still raining?" I glanced out the window, barely registering the downpour. "Yeah, pretty bad." After the call, Jake and I sat in silence. The moment had passed, but the feelings remained, hanging heavily between us like an unfinished sentence. "I should go to bed," I finally said, standing up. "Early meeting tomorrow." He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Good night." After that night, Jake and I created unspoken boundaries. We were careful not to be alone together, keeping our interactions brief and friendly. If Sarah wasn't home, one of us would find a reason to be out. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, but necessary. 2 weeks later, to my mixed relief and disappointment, he found his own apartment across town. "It's small, but it'll do until I find something better," he told Sarah as they discussed his move. I listened from the kitchen, telling myself I was glad he was leaving, that it would make things easier. But the truth was, despite everything, I had grown accustomed to his presence, to the quiet moments we shared, to the possibility of him. On the day he moved out, Sarah was helping him load the last of his things into his car. "I'll go grab that box from your room," she said, running back upstairs. Jake and I stood awkwardly in the hallway, alone for the first time in weeks. "So, this is it," I said, trying to sound casual. "Looks like it," he replied, his eyes searching mine for something I was afraid to give. Impulsively, I slipped a note into his jacket pocket, just 3 words scribbled on a torn piece of paper. "Maybe someday else." His eyes widened slightly, but before he could respond, Sarah returned with the box. The moment was gone. Weeks turned into months, and life returned to normal, or what passed for normal now. Sarah occasionally mentioned Jake, but the intense feelings had began to fade into a bittersweet memory of what could have been. I dated other people, focused on work, convinced myself it had been nothing more than proximity and timing. Then, 6 months later, at Sarah's birthday party, he walked in. He looked different somehow, more confident, maybe, or just more settled in his new life. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and everything came rushing back. The tension, the attraction, the possibilities. He made his way through the crowd toward me, and I felt my heart racing, just like that first night in the dimly lit apartment. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," I replied, suddenly aware of how much time had passed and how nothing had changed at all. "I still have that note," he said quietly, so only I could hear. I looked around at the party. Sarah was across the room, surrounded by friends from the hospital, completely unaware of the conversation happening in the corner. "And?" I asked, holding my breath. "And I've been wondering if someday else is today," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. I didn't have an answer yet, but as we stood there, in our own little bubble amidst the chaos of the party, I knew one thing for certain: some attractions are worth the risk, and some stories are meant to be continued. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more exciting, suspenseful stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, Lust Story. There's so much more to come, and I promise you won't want to miss a single moment of it.